The Black Rose McQueen. I wanted to give a shout out to Ring IQ Boxing, and remember to tune in to the motherfucking relay.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay, where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Spence had this to say to his doubters. Keep talking, I'm gonna prove everybody wrong. Some people can be cruel and say all type of stuff, you know. Spence told Premier Boxing Champions Ray Flores as part of an Instagram Live interview on Monday. But I don't feel like I've been unfairly criticized, because when somebody gets into a car accident like I got into, and, you know, the car flips that many times, and I get thrown out of the car, and, you know, everything that I've been through in that car accident and stuff like that, people are gonna have thoughts. People have thoughts. People have opinions in my situation, and they want to see how I'm gonna come back. So that's just added motivation for myself, and it fuels me, and it makes me work way harder, and I actually do get on YouTube or see the tweets on Twitter, what people have been saying, because it's added motivation for me. It makes me work harder. It makes me, you know, more focused, and it gives me that added hunger that I had, you know, even before the Kell Brook fight. So, you know, like I tell everybody, keep talking, I'm gonna prove everybody wrong. The 30-year-old Spence of DeSoto, Texas has been training for a few months for his comeback bout. It hadn't been scheduled before the coronavirus crisis temporarily shut down boxing business. Spence speculated that he could get a fight in September or October, based on recent conversations with Al Heyman. The 2012 U.S. Olympian had hoped to return to the ring in July or August before the COVID-19 pandemic began. Spence last fought September 28th when he dropped Sean Porter in the 11th round and topped Porter by a split decision in their 12-round, 147-pound title fight. It's very interesting to hear that the unified welterweight champion Errol Spence has taken interest in what the boxing fans have to say about it, what their assessments are, what their opinions are, that he has doubters, that he has naysayers, and he's addressing those naysayers, that he's going to prove everyone wrong. But what is everyone saying that needs to be proven wrong? Well, there are people out there who think that after that car accident, in spite of Errol Spence not breaking any bones, at least if we go off of what the reports are saying, that in spite of him not breaking any bones, upon his return, he really won't be the same fighter that he was before the accident. There is a prevailing theory that Errol Spence is not going to be the same guy that he was before.
Might not.
Now, whether or not you agree with that assessment is besides the point, because what we're addressing is that there are those opinions floating out there, that there are people out there that think Errol, he's damaged goods.
That's what they think.
And Errol Spence is aware of these opinions, and he seeks to prove them wrong. That these opinions are the added motivation he needs to get back in the swing of things. But how does he do it? And who does he do it against? I mean, how can Errol Spence prove to the naysayers that are out there that he's indeed the same fighter that he was before, if not better than he was before? It is being reported that Errol Spence's very next fight, whenever that is going to be against Danny Garcia. It's an interesting matchup. It has some intrigue. It doesn't have all the intrigue of the Crawford fight. That's the fight that everybody's actually clamoring for. That's the fight that everybody really wants to see. But that's also the fight that's not very likely to happen next. No likelihood. It's Danny that he's going to be fighting. One is left to wonder, what would be the function of putting Errol in there with Danny as opposed to Terrence? What purpose would that save? And it saves a few purposes.
It does.
If you really want to think about it, if you want to gauge it. That, you know, on one end, the riskiest fight out there for Errol Spence right now is the Crawford fight. If you put him in that fight, in his very next fight, he could very well lose that fight. I mean, it's possible. It's possible that Terrence Crawford stands a better chance of beating Errol than Danny, at least from where I'm sitting. And perhaps from where the people over there at the PBC are sitting, it looks the same way, that that's the riskiest fight you could put Errol in. So before we come to that, before we take on those risks, we'll have Errol go in there with our PBC stable of guys, because we got a lot of fights over here we can make for him ahead of that Terrence Crawford fight. One fight is a Garcia fight.
It's a good fight.
It is. It's a decent fight. I don't think it has the same level of intrigue, the same level of excitement that a Crawford fight would yield, but better still, there is some intrigue associated with that fight for a few reasons. The stylistic matchup is one thing to consider, but there are certain variables, certain wild cards that also require consideration. That, hypothetically speaking, If Errol Spence returns to the ring in September, perhaps late September,
Okay.
it will have effectively been a year's time since Errol Spence's last fight.
Okay.
So he'd be coming off of a year of inactivity, and in between that year, he had to recover from a very horrific car accident. Thus, these are not the ideal conditions to take on the biggest risks, the biggest challenges that are out there, namely a Terrence Crawford fight. In this situation, you want to put Errol in there with someone interesting enough that people will pay attention, but not someone so interesting that perhaps he's in over his head and he's taking on too much too soon. Enter Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia, who's a good boxer, a very well-rounded guy, very experienced guy, who's campaigned in the division as of August 2014. That's roughly 10 professional contests over the course of 6 years. Danny's been around the block, for better or worse. Today, he is ranked as a top 10 welterweight in the division. That creates a situation that is interesting enough that perhaps
It'll get some attention.
and just such a match is interesting enough that people will tune in, but not so interesting that Errol will be in over his head, taking on too much too soon. As Danny's a well-rounded boxer. He is. He's picked up some good wins over the course of his career, but what Danny isn't is the most physical of welterweights. He's not a rough and tumble guy to where he's gonna
Maul you.
apply a whole lot of pressure. That's just not Danny's calling card. Danny has his virtues, but he's not some come forward aggressive plotter who's gonna let the fists fly. Danny's not a pressure fighter, quite the opposite. Danny is more methodical. In fact, Danny has been accused of not being as ambitious as he should be in high-level situations. High-level situations like the Thurman fight, like the Sean Porter fight. To where, Danny's holding his own, he's not getting beaten from pillar to post. He's hanging in there, he's making it competitive, but he's not quite doing enough to have things his way. He's a safer choice because he's not as physical a guy and he does not apply as much pressure as some others. As pressure, for a guy in Errol Spence's position, that's not what you want after a year of inactivity. That's not the kind of fighter you want to take on after a year of inactivity and you're recovering from a car accident. Danny is a safer choice than some others. He's interesting enough that people will pay attention, but not so interesting
That is too much too soon.
it allows Errol to get back in the swing of things, and it allows people over there at the PBC to get the most out of their investment. Their investment being Errol Spence, as they are invested in this fighter. It's quite clear that they want this guy to be the heir apparent to their welterweight stable, their pay-per-view attraction. That is the level of investment that they have in Errol. And before they go jeopardizing that investment by putting him in there with a Terrence Crawford, they'll keep him busy with a Danny Garcia, for more reasons than one. So we can see what the hierarchy of thought is. And if it happens that way, if the very next fight that Errol Spence has is against Danny Garcia, there is some intrigue, and it is an interesting stylistic matchup. As, reiterate, Danny's not the most ambitious of fighters.
He's not.
He's not a physical guy to where he's going to maul you, throw a whole lot of punches. He's not busy like that. But what Danny is a very educated boxer-puncher with an affinity for counter-punching. I believe that creates a situation where Errol Spence will be the aggressor. It will be Errol Spence coming forward, getting on that front foot, taking the initiative. Errol Spence, who fights out of the southpaw stance and jabs with his right hand, whereas Danny Garcia, being an orthodox fighter, leads with his left. This creates a scenario where perhaps Errol Spence picks up many of the early rounds as he's the busier fighter, the busier puncher, the more prolific puncher out of the two guys. Whenever it's a southpaw versus an orthodox fighter, it does create a problem for that orthodox fighter. We talk about it all the time, how a southpaw's jab might come over the top of an orthodox fighter's jab, and because of this, it throws the orthodox fighter off their game. They want to set up their punches, but they can't because every time they shoot their lead hand, the other guy's lead hand's coming over the top of theirs.
It could.
Provided that the southpaw is a bit of a jabber, and it just so happens that Errol Spence is a bit of a jabber. He uses his jab as a key to get within range, mid-range, to inside, and dig in hard body shots. See a situation to where Errol Spence may pick up many of the early rounds as a result of, 1, him being a southpaw, 2, him being the busier, more prolific puncher. But the thing about Danny is a bit of a talented counterpuncher. So while Errol Spence might have success early on, there is a question as to whether or not Danny Garcia can't time this guy and catch him with one of those devastating hooks of his, one of those devastating no-look hooks. For example, if Errol Spence jabs his way in with his right hand, goes to use his left to plant a body shot, he will be susceptible to a right hand from Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia, who has shown some respectable power at this weight. That he's not the biggest puncher. No, he's not. But you don't want to let this guy chin you. You don't want to let this guy catch you clean.
Nope.
That being said, Errol Spence...
He's got question marks.
Today he does. Because if this hypothetical matchup were to take place in late September, it will have been a year's time since Errol Spence's last fight, and he will be coming off of a horrific car accident.
Is he holding up?
Creates question as to whether or not Errol Spence can take Danny Garcia's best. We know of Danny Garcia is that while he doesn't have the fastest feet or the fastest hands, he does have good timing.
That he does.
He does have good timing, and he does have good counters with a respectable punch. Just as well, Danny Garcia's got a chin.
That he does.
He can take a punch. You know, I remember when Danny Garcia first moved up into the welterweight division. There were questions hanging over his head as to how durable would he prove to be against the division's top fighters. And hindsight being 2020, Danny Garcia has proven to have respectable punch resistance, as he's been in there with at least two of the best welterweights the division's seen in recent years. You know, Keith Diamond. A lot of people thought Keith Diamond was going to have his way with Danny, and he didn't, you know. A lot of people thought that Sean Porter was going to run over Danny.
Yep.
And he didn't. You know, these guys, they didn't walk through him, and they didn't walk him down. It's because not only does Danny Garcia have a good chin, he can take what you got, but he can give you something to think about. For Errol...
Gotta wonder.
And his unique set of circumstances, one is left to wonder if he won't get timed by Danny Garcia, if he won't get height by Danny Garcia, given what he's coming from. Could see a situation to where Errol Spence is having things his way in the early rounds. He gains a comfortable lead, in the process of that becomes comfortable himself, and perhaps gets timed and gets caught by one of Danny's no-look hooks. I mean, it's possible. Stranger things have happened in the sport of boxing, and the question is, how will Errol handle the shot? How will he deal with it? It being that it will have been possibly a year's time since he had a fight, and he's recovering from a horrific car accident. His physical condition has question marks hanging over it. You might be thinking to yourself, well, in a manner of speaking, Danny Garcia, he'll be coming off of some inactivity as well, won't he? Well, that's not really true. You see, Danny Garcia managed to get a fight in this year. January, he had that fight with Ivan Redkach. Wasn't the most impressive performance I've ever seen. It wasn't the most ambitious either. But better still, Errol Spence's time away from the ring exceeds Danny Garcia's time away from the ring.
3 months?
That, coupled with the car accident, creates a question as to whether or not Errol Spence's physical condition, his timing, his reflexes, his ability to read a guy,
All of that stuff.
won't be affected by the hiatus, the time away. As Danny, he hasn't been away from the ring as long as Errol, and Danny, unlike Errol, he's not coming off a horrific car accident that he had to recover from. There's a wild card in there. There is a variable. We don't know the actual physical state of Errol Spence. That's the wild card when it comes to Errol. When it comes to Danny, the variable, wild card, as it were, is if Danny will so decide to finally rise to the occasion and do enough to secure the victory
Unlike before.
in the big fight. You see, Danny Garcia, he might have been in the welterweight division since 2014. But as it stands, he's really picked up no big wins in this division. His biggest endeavors, his biggest exploits have been fights where he came up short. Just short of the mark. The fight with Keith Diamond, their unification match, and the fight with Sean Porter for what was the vacant WBC title. Danny was definitely in those fights, and those were competitive matches, but Danny didn't do enough. Did enough to hang in there, he did enough to make it competitive, but he did not do enough to win those fights. And those were the most solid, elite-level welterweights he fought. But when you think about it, after 6 years and 10 professional contests in the welterweight division, Danny Garcia hasn't actually picked up any elite-level victories over the best and brightest fighters the division has to offer. I mean, what is Danny Garcia's best win at welterweight? You tell me. What, Paulie Malignaggi?
Huh?
Paulie's supposed to be a window, an insight into what an Errol Spence fight would look like.
Huh?
Because Paulie's southpaw with a devastating punch. Is that it? What, the ghost of Robert Guerrero? Is that supposed to be some kind of insight into a Spence fight? I mean, you tell me. What is Danny Garcia's biggest victory, his best win in a welterweight division. Samuel Vargas? What's beating Samuel Vargas supposed to tell me? What, Adrian Granados? Ivan Redkach? Two guys who spent most of their careers below the welterweight division?
Is that it?
Campaigning under it? With hindsight being 2020. After 6 years and 10 professional contests as a welterweight, what Danny Garcia has proven is that he's a cut above a certain kind of fighter, but he has yet to deliver. That really has no elite level victories in the welterweight division.
Not really.
As the vast majority of fighters that he has fought at this weight at that time did not represent the best and brightest fighters the division had to offer. And whenever he did fight one of these kinds of fighters, he came up short. Tell you something. Don't let the familiarity of some of these names fool you, alright? You might be familiar with Paulie Malignaggi, but it is a matter of fact that at the time he fought Danny Garcia, ahead of that fight, he was coming off a loss to Sean Porter, a 4th round TKO stoppage. Sean Porter, that was the state of Paulie Malignaggi at the time he fought Danny Garcia. Does he sound like he's one of the best and brightest fighters in the welterweight division when he's coming off a loss? A 4th round TKO stoppage to Sean Porter. I recall the candor associated with the Robert Guerrero fight. Robert, the ghost of Robert Guerrero, who was being classified by many as a shot fighter in that Danny Garcia fight. Essentially, what I'm communicating is that while Danny Garcia has proven that he can compete in the welterweight division, he hasn't proven that he can deliver in the welterweight division, and he would be required to in an Errol Spence fight.
And that's the wild card.
Can he, and will he? Has he caught Errol Spence at the most opportune times to try to pry those belts away from him? That's the variable. That is the wild card. It is these aforementioned factors that accurately encompass what intrigue, what mysteries are associated with this fight. What questions will be answered as a result of it, depending on what the outcome is. Errol Spence quite clearly stated that he wants to prove the naysayers wrong, and I'll tell you what I think. I think that if Errol Spence can go out there and not only beat Danny Garcia, but stop him, I would be thoroughly impressed. As Danny Garcia, this kid's got a chin, I mentioned that earlier. This guy's never been stopped, and if Errol Spence can be the first to do it, I'd have to wholeheartedly say I'd be impressed, and that would serve as an indicator that Errol Spence is back. Though I'm not completely convinced that Errol Spence could or would, as Errol Spence failed to stop a blown-up lightweight who wasn't even fighting back. So is he going to stop Danny when you couldn't stop Mikey? Threw 1,000 punches at Mikey Garcia and couldn't stop him, so he's going to stop Danny?
I don't know, man. We'll see what happens.